Hi, everybody. So today we start talking about video games. So here we go. So platform. So platform is how you access the video game. So if you think about your mobile device, or if you think about console, if you think about just being on your computer, those are all forms of a platform, right? How you access the game, whether it's your mobile phone, whether it's your computer, whether it's a console, it's how you access the game. So again, platform is how you access the game. So there's MMORPG, which stands for Massively Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Game. And so this term was used a lot when World of Warcraft was the rage. I'm not sure if it's still the rage. I don't play video games really. I don't need that habit because I already have enough bad habits. But anyway, so massively multiplayer online role-playing game. And I guess the term came about because when when the game was big, there was all these folks that were online at the same time, and if you ever played the game, you are playing a specific role. So whether that be you know a, some sort of knight or whatever the characters were, and I never played World of Warcraft, but whatever the characters were, you were playing that character. So again, massively multiplayer online role-playing game. So there is something called the first-person game versus a third-person game, and really what I'm referring to is just perspective. So what is the perspective that you're playing? Some people prefer to play a first-person video game where essentially your body is the screen. And then there's the third-person game where essentially you can see your avatar or your character on screen. So what I mean by that, if you look at the perspective, right, this is first person perspective versus third person perspective. I don't play, again, much video games, but I prefer the third person. I would like to see myself getting killed versus, first person where I don't really see what hit me. So again, I'm referring to perspective here, first person versus third person. Some people like to play a first person perspective. Others like myself like to play third person perspective. So it's all about perspective. So independent video game developer, what I'm referring to are just development companies. And so you need to think about video games as sort of actually very similar to movies. And so in the case of independent video game developers, it's just a small one-person operation. It could be, or just a small group of people. They don't work with any specific publisher. They don't necessarily make any of these gigantic or popular games. It's all pretty much low budget, more or less. So again, it's a small one-person operation, or maybe it's just a small group. They don't work with a specific publisher. They're kind of on their own. So then we have third party video game developer. So third party basically means that it's hired um, by a publisher. So you're developing a game for a publisher. So maybe you seeked out that publisher, or that publisher seeked you out. But whatever the deal was, that you are now making a game for a video game publisher. So again, you're hired by a publisher to make a video game. I guess an example would be a company like maybe a Take-Two might be a good example of a third-party developer. Second-party developer. Second-party developer has a first look deal with a specific publisher. It might accept a development deal with a certain publisher. So again, a first look deal with a specific publisher. It might accept a development deal with a specific publisher or a certain publisher. So maybe something like a Game Freak or something like that. And so what do I mean by a first look deal? So a first look deal means that if you come up with the game, right, you have to pitch it first to that video game company or publisher, I should say. So again, if you come up with an idea for a video game, you have to pitch that idea first to that specific video game publisher. So that's what a first look deal means. Now, we have first-party video game developer. So a first-party video game developer means that the video game publisher also owns the video game developer. So everything's being produced in-house. So, so for instance, maybe like something like Nintendo or something like a Sony might be a good example of a first-party video game developer because it's an in-house developer that's owned by the publisher. So it's in-house developer that's owned by the publisher. And some companies really like to do the development and the publishing all in-house. So if you think about video games and compare it to movies, it'd be like a studio development deal where you have a studio producer who produces a movie for a specific studio, and the idea never leaves the studio. So it's the same idea when it comes to video games. In this case, you have a video game developer who's making a game for a video game publisher, but it just so happens that that video game publisher also owns the developer. All right, so video game publisher. So a video game publisher, if you need to think about it as in terms of a distributor, in essence. So the publisher is in charge of paying for all the promotional promotion. They pay for all the legal stuff like licensing. They charge a distribution fee. They're usually the part of the business that finances the deal. So they're in charge of the financing, the distribution. They pay for all the promotion. They pay for the legal, any sort of legal things, the licensing aspect. They are the ones that green light the projects. They are in charge of, let's see, what else? They might pay a manufacturing fee if they're not part of if they're not a manufacturer. What I mean by manufacturer is that, you know, they might pay, like, for instance, Nintendo or Sony a manufacturing fee so they can get their game on to that console. So the video game publisher is immensely important. You got to think of the video game publisher as sort of being like, again, a motion picture distributor. They do everything, including paying for the development of the video game. So hopefully that was pretty clear. So a little bit about the history of the video game industry. So we had the cathode tube amusement device. Now this is important because this was only a patent. A patent was taken out in 1947, I believe, but the game was never made. It was only a video game patent. So I'm not really quite sure why the video game wasn't produced. My guess, and I'm guessing only, I don't know, is that we probably didn't have technology available to actually make this into a video game. So again, this was just a video game patent. Actually, the video game was not actually produced. So Tennis for Two. So Tennis for Two actually is the first video game. Now it is the first video game, but it was only played in the lab. So it's not like it was available to the public. Okay, so again, Tennis for Two, first video game, but it was, first video game, but it was played in the lab. First video game, it was played in the lab, and that's Tennis for Two. Space War. So Space War, it really is sort of like the first competitive sort of video game in a sense that the game was played in various locations, but it was primarily played in universities, and these university clubs would play against each other. So again, this game was first to be played at various locations. It was played in universities. It had no audio, but this was the rage, at least amongst college students that played video games at the time. So Computer Space, first arcade video game. First arcade video game. It was produced by Nolan Bushnell, and Nolan Bushnell is considered the father of the US video game industry. So again, Computer Space, 1971. First video game. It was produced by Nolan Bushnell, who's known as the father of video games, or at least US video games. Pong. So Pong was really the first successful video game that was produced, at least here in the United States. So it came out in 1972. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this. I'm sure you have. It's sort of like you're playing hockey on television. It had these bumpers, and you'd hit this ball, and every time you hit the ball, it'd go faster and faster and faster. You could play it on your TV. I mean, I remember very vaguely when I was a little kid, some of my rich cousins would be playing Pong on their TV. And this video game was also produced by Nolan Bushnell, who again is the father of the US video game industry. So Magnavox. Magnavox was the first commercial console that was available, at least here in the United States. It wasn't all that popular. A little bit later on, we have something called the Coleco Telestar, which was a pretty good seller. It was a top seller, at least in the early part of the console market in the 1970s. But it hence you have the question mark, because if I remember correctly, Coleco Telestar made all sorts of video game consoles, and not all of them were profitable. They did make one that was, relatively profitable. I think they sold 1 million units, which, back then was pretty good. But again, I'm not quite sure if it was profitable because they made so many different types of consoles. But anyways, that was the top seller in the early stages of the console. Now, the first global hit and really the first shooter game had one of the highest grosses for an arcade game was Space Invaders. Was a big deal back in the day. And so again, first global hit, first shooter game. It's a game that even if you played it today, it came out in 1978. So even 40 years later, it's still a pretty cool video game if you've ever played it. The game was developed by a Japanese man named Tomohiro Nishikado. I butchered his name, sorry. So Tomohiro Nishikado was the person who developed the video game, and I'm almost 100% sure that he's a Japanese. So Pac-Man. Pac-Man comes out in 1980. This essentially is the second most popular, the second big hit that comes along. So we have a game that comes out of Japan, right, called Space Invaders. And shortly thereafter, we have Pac-Man, another very popular game that also comes out of Japan. So it's produced by a Japanese man named Toru Iwatani, I should say, Toru Iwatani. And so he developed this particular video game. Again, he is Japanese. Pac-Man is really the first video game to become sort of like this cultural phenomena. It's really the first game to create a huge merchandising line that went around, that surrounded the game. And there was like Pac-Man toys, people were wearing Pac-Man shirts, t-shirts, there was Pac-Man pajamas, there was a Pac-Man song. And so this particular video game will end up passing up Space Invaders in terms of being the highest grossing. So they're both relatively close in terms of grosses. They both made about $14 billion, and that's just an estimate. I'm sure they've made more than that. It's really hard to keep track of all the quarters that went into these particular arcade games. So this is a little bit about Pac-Man if you're not familiar with Pac-Man.
Chances are you know who this is. If not, how about now? You know him as Pac-Man, that little hungry guy with a love-hate relationship with 4 colorful ghosts, Blinky, Inky, Pinky, and Clyde. He was born on the 22nd of May, 1980. 40 years later, he is still one of the most recognizable pieces of design in the world. Pac-Man was the brainchild of a young developer at Japanese gaming company Namco, Toru Iwatani.
で、そこでは男の遊び場だったんです。で、エイリアンをやっつけろとか。で、女性でもプレイできる非常にシンプルなゲームルールで、シンプルなコントロールでできるゲームで、食べるをキーワードに考えました。
It was a complete anomaly against everything else that we were playing at that time. All of a sudden, here comes this candy-colored, musically oriented, simple gameplay video game called Pac-Man.
Big influences behind Pac-Man were the cartoons of the era.
で、ゲームですので、当然敵が必要になってくる。ね、を考えまして、私が、小さい頃は、漫画でお化けの Q 太郎っていうのがあったりとか、それから、テレビアニメーションの、出てこいキャスパー、仲良く喧嘩するというトム&ジェリーっていうアニメーション。
Pac-Man could fight back too by eating power pellets, an idea that came from Popeye eating spinach. And to make it more interesting, Toru and his team gave the ghosts individual personalities.
I don't know, Clyde. We ain't very good at fixing leaks.
パックマンの周りにゴーストが囲むように、するようなアルゴリズムを、プログラマーの船木さんが考えてくれて、4匹とも違う追いかけ方をするというアルゴリズムで、うまくゲームができました。
The game's look was just one part of its appeal. The way it sounded was just as important.
日本では食べるときにパクパク食べるっていうパクパクという、擬態語があるんですね。で、そのパクパクということで、パックマン。
Pac-Man arrived on the scene in 1980. In the US alone, it took in $1 billion in quarters on 100,000 arcade games during the first 15 months. Pac-Man fever had arrived, and it brought every kind of memorabilia with it.
Board games and, sheets and calendars and sticker books, like Pac-Man was everywhere.
Now at 40, Pac-Man is one of the world's longest-running video game characters. Was Iwatani surprised by the game's success?
まずこれだけ、世界に、広がってプレイされるとは思ってませんでした。
Maybe at the onset of Pac-Man, Mr. Iwatani didn't understand exactly what he was doing from a cultural perspective, but undeniably, Pac-Man changed the entire trajectory of video games forever.
So please remember the importance of Pac-Man, really one of the cultural phenomena, at least when it comes to video games, just in terms of, again, not only the popularity of the video game just at the arcades, but also the popularity that it's going to have on the console, but also in merchandising. So again, one of the first games that really was able to spin off and make additional products off of the video game. Back then, it was mostly, if anything, movies that were able to do it, but this was really the first video game that did that. So Atari 2600 really becomes the very first popular console. Comes out, and I believe it was in we're in the early 80s, and so so the console was able to really come along at the right time, unlike Telestar or Magnavox, and so basically was able to take advantage of some really popular video games like Pac-Man and like Space Invaders. So it was able to secure the rights to use the cartridges. So they obviously got permission from the Pac-Man distributor and from the Space Invaders distributor to be able to use their games and produce them, make them into cartridges to be used on the console. And so the person who was running Atari at the time. His name was Nolan Bushnell. Nolan Bushnell, again, is considered to be the father of the U.S. video game industry. And again, he is also the person who developed Pong, and he had developed also Computer Space. So he also came up with the idea of a very famous restaurant that most of you have probably been to called Chuck E. Cheese. So very famous guy who's not had just one great idea, he's had several great ideas. So Activision is the first third-party developer and distributor, meaning that what happened was Activision people, some Atari employees became very upset with Atari and the working conditions at Atari. And so afterwards, a group of former Atari individuals developed their own company called Activision. So this is really the first third-party video game developer. Again, third-party means that you are independent and that you are you make video games for a developer, but you're not owned by the developer. You're not tied to the developer. And also, they were the first sort of third-party video game distributor. This was sort of important because most of the video game distributors back then, at least, they were usually tied to some sort of console, but not Activision. And so this is why you're going to see some Activision video games that are going to be used on Atari systems, because essentially Activision was making some video games for Atari, but again, they were not owned by Atari. So in 1983, we have what's called the video game crash of 1983. And so this is when the video game crash, at least in the United States, happened. And so, the video game industry lost about 95% of its revenue here in the United States. And largely because a couple of reasons happened. So number one, there was a poor quality of video games. So I want to show you a clip of Conan O'Brien playing video games from back in the day. The quality was just terrible. The graphics were horrible. And so that's part of it. Also, what ended up happening was there was an oversaturation, especially of consoles in the early 80s. There's all these competitive consoles, and they're all like basically selling consoles at a very cheap price, and to the point where they probably weren't even breaking even because they were selling the consoles at such a low price. And so because of this competition, and because of the oversaturation, number one, and number two, because of the poor quality of the video games, the video game industry loses about 95% of its revenue. And for the most part, most video game companies go out of business in the United States, at least. And I'll show you what I'm talking about shortly. The one saving grace there was for the video game industry was Nintendo. They were still going strong over in Japan. So their color game TV series was not popular anywhere else. I don't even know if they released it anywhere else, but it was quite popular in Japan, and it kept Nintendo afloat, and it kept them in the game. They kept on producing video games. And so really Nintendo is credited with saving the industry. And so what Nintendo did for the most part is that they utilized a lot of first party developers. So they did everything in-house. And part of that was to control the quality of the game. So they would stamp or put a sticker on their video games with the seal of quality. So knowing that, that they've made assurances, right, that this video game was going to be of high quality. So they didn't really rely on independent third-party developers to make the game on their behalf. Again, they relied on first-party video game developers, and everything was done in-house for them to make these high-quality video games. And this is what's going to sustain them in the long term. And later on, American companies will start to adopt that idea as well. So anyways, this is the result of the video game crash of 1983. As you can see, some of these video games and some of the graphics that are used, I mean, they're pretty bad. I think part of it also, what happened was, especially when a game like E.T., which you're about to see right now, is that there was just too quick of a turnaround. The person who was making this video game really didn't have enough time to make a good video game. I think he had 5 weeks to make this video game. Anyways, you'll see.
Hey, Conan O'Brien here with a vintage edition of Clueless Gamer, and I'm here with my pal, Aaron Blair.
Hello.
We've pretty much played many of the cutting-edge modern games.
Absolutely.
And I'm routinely terrible.
That's true.
And contemptuous of the medium. And we are going to look at some of the classic Atari video games. Is that right?
That's right. We're doing kind of a throwback episode, and we're going to see how it all started. The Atari 2600 is kind of the grandfather of all video games.
I thought this was a grill, a George Foreman grill. I'm glad you told me, because I was just about to put 2 hamburger patties down there and start grilling. Now, quickly show me the video game controllers that we've been using.
Yeah.
All the games I've reviewed, pretty much,
yes,
have been with this incredibly sophisticated control system. But let's step back in time. Look at this.
Yeah.
This looks like the defibrillator they used on Elvis. Just checking out.
We're going to play a lot of games today, but the game that came with the Atari 2600 was called Combat.
It came with a booklet. This smells like the mid-70s. It smells like Stevie Nicks.
So just shove it in there.
Okay.
And then flip on the power. All right, so you're just going to try to kill me. You're the blue tank.
I'm the blue tank.
Yep.
You can barely tell that's a tank. It looks vaguely sexual. When people played this for the first time, they thought this is the most amazing thing that ever happened, right?
Yes, exactly. Their minds were blown.
There's nothing here that's remotely tank-like. All right, I now know why everyone was high back then. The only way to make these games exciting. This is dreadful. Let's put it on watch paint dry. All right, now we're going to look at Missile Command, another Atari game that promises much more than it can deliver with the cover art. Aliens from the planet of Crystal have begun an attack on the planet Zardon. The Krytolians have begun fight. It's so sad that someone had to write this. And you know what? We know we're about to see 3 blips. They've prepared me for, oh, there we go, yeah? Those are Zardonians and Krytolians, all right. What do I do?
So you move the dash around. Yeah, so the colored circles knock out the blips.
Okay, while you were explaining it to me, I lost my city. But you know what? This city looks like shit, so I don't care. At the time, what's really scary is this was about the sophistication of the computer that controlled all our nuclear missiles. The Russians probably saw these games and thought, we should attack now. These are dreadful, absolutely dreadful, but we're moving on to golf. There's a nice depiction on the front of what I think is Senator Robert Kennedy. And then we're going to see how it's depicted here.
All right, ready?
In this game. Oh, God. Look at that sad little world. What's happening now? Is that a human being? I hope he's holding a golf club, or else he's a perv. Look at his movement, so fluid, so golf-like. What a horrible era for mankind. I can go and look at an old butter churn or a turn of the century car, totally. And I can appreciate the beauty of it.
Absolutely.
I can look at a 1950s Bakelite phone, and it still works, and it's very beautiful.
Yeah.
This is awful. This is just America on its knees.
Here we go. River Raid.
River Raid.
Here we go.
What am I on? What is this? I don't even know what I'm on.
You're a plane.
Oh, I'm a plane. And I'm going over a river? When I drift to the side, I shouldn't be smashing into the bank of the river, right?
Right.
So I don't understand where I am in time and space. Am I in the air?
Yeah,
where am I?
You're a plane.
Where am I?
Oh, no,
I'm a plane. What is this?
River
Raid.
River Raid.
River Raid! This may be the worst day of my life.
So this is actually one of the most popular games that Atari had. It's called Pitfall.
Pitfall. Look, this is the genius behind this game right here. The picture was taken shortly before he snapped. and murdered everyone in his condo.
All right, so here we go.
That's me.
Yep.
Oh,
Boom.
and then what am I supposed to do there?
Oh, nothing. That's a log. You're supposed to jump on. That's bad.
Going this way.
Okay. Do you want to jump on that?
I don't even know what I'm doing. That's the one direction in the whole game is, look at that. That's supposed to help us. What's next?
Space Invaders? Remember Space Invaders? This game?
Oh, right. I just dodge what they're doing and fire. Is that right?
That's it.
You know what? This is actually an okay game, though, still.
Here we go.
This is a game, and I'm actually playing it, and I know what I'm doing. We found my game. Space Invaders, yes.
Awesome.
Still holds up.
So we had a poll online where fans could choose what game they wanted to see you play.
Okay.
They chose this.
E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
Now here's the thing about E.T. It's widely regarded as the worst video game of all time.
Worse than the golf?
Way worse.
Really? Uh-oh. E.T.?
Yeah. Okay, so
E.T. is coming down in an elevator.
Yeah.
The elevator just left him in a swamp. Where am I going? He's just pacing nervously. And who's that guy?
I think he's the FBI agent. Don't let him touch you.
If you see a man in a trench coat, never let him touch you.
That is a piece of your telephone. The whole point of this game is to collect 3 pieces of your telephone, then call your spaceship, and it comes back to rescue you. Okay, now go up. Now you're flying.
Oh, when his neck extends, he's flying. Okay,
now you fell in another hole.
Yeah, so I got another piece of my telephone.
Yeah, well, that's a flower, so you hit the thing and the flower will go up. There you go, you made the flower go up.
Why would I make the flower go? What's the point of that?
I think it was in the movie.
I don't think...
I don't remember. All right, you fell in another hole. You just got to do the neck thing and get out.
So there's a lot of just falling in a hole and then extending my neck and floating out.
That's basically the whole game.
This just simulates the cycles of depression. The sound effects are fantastic. Listen. This is the one the fans wanted me to play?
Yeah.
Thank you, fans. Thanks for having me experience that. The fans asked me to play E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Let me rate it. If Flock of Seagulls is good.
All right, so you can clearly see, right, the poor quality of the video games. One of the big reasons, again, why the video game industry in 1983, at least in the United States, is going to crash. And it's going to lose 95% of its revenue. And a lot of companies that were producing video games and publishing video games are going to go out of business in 1983. And so some say that there was even video games buried out in some sort of landfill. I don't know if that's true or not, but there's all sorts of myths regarding what happened during the video game crash of 1983. So here you see a traditional value chain. And this is, of course, traditional. Some of these aspects are actually kind of going away in some regards. But anyways, if you think about the developer and you see the arrow going down towards the publisher, I'm referring to these arrows as sort of being a first party. In this case, you have a first party publisher who's working with a developer. This is why you see the arrow going down, but you also see the arrow going up because they are connected. Now, if they're not connected, just keeps going down. But anyways, if you think about the developer does all the programming, the software, right? They're in charge of actually making the software for the actual video game. The publisher, on the other hand, down here, is in charge of things, again, like I said before, things like licensing the game, right? So let's just say, I don't know, you're making a video game for Marvel or for Star Wars or whatever. And so you would need to get the publisher to get to try to reach out to the whoever owned the intellectual property and get permission to actually make that video game about whatever Marvel character you're talking about, or whatever Star Wars character you're talking about, or whatever movie you're talking about. The publisher is in charge of getting clearances for licensing. So you can actually make those sorts of spin-offs off of, let's say, a movie. The manufacturer builds the consoles. So, you know, a lot of publishers nowadays don't make consoles. Some still do, obviously. If you think about Nintendo or Sony, right? They still make, obviously, consoles like a PlayStation. So the manufacturer builds the console. Now, if the manufacturer is owned by the publisher, then you don't have to pay a fee. But if the publisher is not a part or is not a part of the manufacturer, and they want their game in the manufacturer's console, typically then, right, the publisher is going to pay a fee to the manufacturer. So it's a royalty fee for every game that they produce that's compatible with the console. They pay a fee to the manufacturer who builds, again, the console. So we have the distributor. The distributor is the part of the business that actually ships, right, the game out. So it could be a platform, right, as a distributor, and so, but they also are could be the distributor who ships the game to retail stores, so you can buy them on shelves. And of course, we have the retailer. And so let's say maybe the retailer is, I don't know, Target or something like a Best Buy or a GameStop or whatever. And so they are the points of purchase, right? POPs, like sometimes they call them. Sometimes they might be called POSs, which is point of sale. So they are the ones that are the point of sale. And of course, the end user would be the gamer, right? The person who actually uses the video game. So this is a traditional value chain. So again, developer, you see the arrows up and down. With the publisher, I'm referring to a first party, right? Developer makes the software. Publisher gets all the clearances. They're in charge of licensing the game. Manufacturer builds console. Distributor ships it out to the retailers. The retailers sell it to the end user. So funding. So the way it works, again, a lot like movies. So video game developer, oftentimes will pitch an idea to a publisher. Can think of a publisher as sort of being like a distributor or studio distributor. The publisher has the money, and so so that's how the game gets started in terms of funding, if the publisher likes the idea, of course. And then at times, the publisher seeks out the developer. So let's just say that it's Nintendo or Sony or something that's, relatively big publisher. They may seek out a specific developer, especially if they've had a good relationship with that developer in the past. They may seek out that developer to have that company build a game for them. When it comes to funding, the developer's going to ask for an advance, right? So typically that might be $1 million or whatever the advance they're going to ask. If they don't ask for an advance, they typically ask for an upfront development fee, right? And so what I mean by that is they may ask for $1 million. So let's just say that they ask for $1 million in upfront development fee because that's going to be their burn rate. And so what do I mean by a burn rate? So it means that how much are they paying? Let's say if they need office space, they got to pay rent, right, for a certain period of time. And then if they figure it's going to take them about a year to make that particular video game, they also want to make sure that all the employees are getting paid. So the burn rate basically takes into account how much are they spending per month. And so I just use that as $1 million as a number, and maybe that they're going to burn through that $1 million, let's say, in 10 months. And so that would be an upfront development fee. And again, burn rate is how much are they spending per month on employee overhead, on rent, and those sorts of things. So milestones. Milestones are important because this is oftentimes how a developer gets paid. It's a production schedule. And so basically the developer and the publisher are going to agree okay, but once we hit this milestone, like let's say a beta, we get paid. When we reach alpha, we'll get paid. So these specific milestones that are laid out between the publisher and developer is how the developer is getting paid. So it's really important for both parties, right? Not just the developer getting paid, but the milestones are important for the publisher because it lets them know that the developer's on track to deliver the game at whenever they agree to have that game delivered. So it's important for both parties, right? Again, the developer is getting paid, publisher knows that the game is on track to getting produced. So crunch time is typically something bad in the industry, and crunch time means that the developer has fallen behind on the production schedule. And so that usually means that all the employees that are working for the developer, or many of them, need to be working overtime so they can catch up. So again, crunch time means that the development company has fallen behind, and so therefore a lot of the people who work for the developer are going to have to work overtime to catch up. Crowdfunding, obviously nowadays, especially if a developer doesn't want to work with any specific publisher, they can basically start a crowdfunding program and basically try to get people to pay $5-10, and that fundraising will be used to make the video game. And so in this particular case, right, they're going to completely circumvent or avoid the publisher because they're raising their funds publicly through donations. Now, of course, this is, if you want to do a crowdfunding thing, people have to have a lot of faith in your ability to actually make the video game. So common milestones, and again, this is important for both parties, both for the producer of the developer, I should say, of the video game, and it's also very important for the publisher because it lets the publisher know that the game is on track to being made on time or produced on time. So first playable game is the first functional version of the game. So this particular version is gonna have all sorts of issues, but at least you can sort of play with that first copy. It's this first version of the game. So alpha, the alpha means all the major features of the game are done. And again, once the developer shows this to the publisher, the publisher typically pays the developer, a certain dollar amount. Code freeze. Code freeze means the developer is going to debug the game. So again, developer debugs and code freeze, getting rid of all the glitches within the game. You have the beta stage. So the beta stage typically means that the video game is now being tested. Usually means external testing. There's no bugs that are at least visible, or at least that you haven't encountered. So you pretty much have debugged the game, and now you're sending it out to, let's say, experts within the industry that are testing it out to see if they can find any issues or any other bugs in the game. So code release, it's tested for quality and assurance, Q&A, quality and assurance. Gold master, or just the master is the last version. It's the finished product. It's the product that's ready to be either downloaded or it's ready to be purchased. So, to get from first playable down to gold master takes a long time. I mean, it really depends on the game. So a game, let's say like a Call of Duty, may take 2 to 3 years. It's like a movie. There's a lot of steps to get down to gold master. And so obviously if it's just a game for a mobile device, the platforms are smaller, the screens are smaller. So it takes less time if you're going to be playing on a smaller platform. The platform is bigger, it takes more time. So the publisher, he's like the studio, it's incredibly important. So they pay for the game, right? They promote the game. They pay for all any sort of legal issues that you have or any legalities that need to be dealt with. The publisher deals with that. If the game needs anything licensed, they deal with that as well. And so just like in the movie industry, they charge a distribution fee, same thing. The publisher is going to charge a distribution fee to the developer. So again, the publisher is paying a distribution fee to, or developers paying a distribution fee to the publisher. Again, developer paying a distribution fee to the publisher. So as you can see up here in the top corner, right, you might see like the developer might produce like a prototype for the publisher. They might do like a storybook, like you see down here, like a flip book. Those might be produced so they can lay out the concepts for the publisher and whether or not during the pitch this might take place. So again, the publisher green lights the idea. It means that they approve the idea. Typically, again, like movie industry, means that the production executives and the distribution executives like the idea or the project, and they're going to finance the idea and distribute the idea. Every once in a while, they may decide to buy the developer, right, and make it a first-party developer. They're in charge of all securing shelf space if you're shipping it out to, let's say, a Target or a Walmart. So they're working with the retailers. They're also negotiating with platforms like Steam in terms of how are they gonna, what's the deal, how much are they gonna charge, and those sorts of things. They're gonna secure licenses to publish and develop the intellectual property trademarks, especially if you're dealing with popular trademarks, anything dealing with Disney. They need to secure a license if it's for a console like PlayStation. They need to pay for all the localization. So localization means all the cultural symbols or text. So obviously, once you go to a different country, the keyboard, right, the symbols on the keyboard are different. And so to make it compatible with that local culture, you have to localize it. They pay for that. They pay for manufactured games. So again, going back to if they have to pay a manufacturer, again, is the one that builds consoles. And so in order to make their game compatible with the manufacturer, they got to pay a fee to the manufacturer.